Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first of a series on the Disgustingly Resilient podcasts. Learn to play Death Guard, basically. We're hoping to do this series to help teach people how to take Death Guard to a competitive setting. As we're all aware right now, Death Guard are fairly struggling, but this is hopefully going to be a guide that will hopefully help you take your Death Guard to the next level and basically try and push some better results for you with the army. It's still going to be an uphill struggle, but I'm hoping that I can share my knowledge and some tricks that can help you guys basically learn to play Death Guard a bit more successfully, or in tournaments, or at home in your average games. So, first things first, why should you listen to this idiot? So this bit isn't to gloat. This is literally just to give you a bit of gravitas, sort of like evidence to why what I say might be worth listening to, why I'm not just chucking out random content, and why maybe the things I say and the tricks I learn might be worth picking up and trying yourself. So last ITC season, I finished World Rank 2 Death Guard player and the UK number one. The current season, I am UK number one again, and I'm currently World Rank 10, but I've only attended two proper events and an RTT, so I've still got some room to grow on that one, so hopefully we're going up. So far as I know, and as far as the stats seem to show, I'm the only player that's currently been able to go undefeated with Death Guard at a GT level or higher this edition, 10th. I've had a 4-1 result at Leeds Super Major recently, a couple of weeks ago now. Again, in that I played against three Custodes players, a Gene Steel Cup player, and an Eldar player, which is, they're some of the big top dogs at the moment. So to get that result, I was really happy with, and I really love Death Guard. I've played them since they came out. I was playing them before they came out. I was playing Chaos Space Marines painted green. When we got our standalone release, I basically just jumped straight into Death Guard. I've been playing them since they came out. I've took them to comp since, and even though I have owned different armies, I just always go back to the Death Guard. I just really enjoy them. It's where my heart army is. So quick caveat: competitive versus casual. So this channel, Disgustingly Resilient Podcast, is sort of a competitive focused Death Guard channel. We do focus mainly on taking Death Guard to stuff like tournaments and doing the best we can. So just bear in mind all the information provided in this is focused on those competitive games. It's not so much like the things we say are the strict law. So if you're just a casual player who's playing with your friends and want to learn some tricks, don't take everything we say as like you can't play this unit, it is garbage. We're obviously just talking about tournament settings, taking the strongest list possible, and basically trying to get the best results we can with this. But again, the goal is to help all players who want to play Death Guard competitively, or even just like I said, up your game. Because at the moment we're in a bit of a rough place, so we're hoping to sort of help people just raise that game up a little bit more. So, getting into Death Guard itself, enough about the overall jibber jabber. Um, Death Guard itself. So the Death Guard playstyle, as some of you may know, we are slow. This isn't surprising news to anyone. Terminator's moving 4, Iron Infantry moves 5. Our vehicles aren't too bad, usually rocking to between 10 to 12, somewhere around that range. But we are, in general, we're not going to be an army like Eldar that's going to be flying around the board all the time. Resilient, sort of, kind of, maybe. Um, Historically, Death Guard have been a tanky army, a sort of resilient army. Not never the tankiest, but we've had a ability to absorb damage more so than other armies. Now this at the moment is debatable, but still we generally rock higher toughness than your average unit in comparison. And we have some units that are relatively tough, one being on your screen there, Mr. Mortarian. A quick note, going to miss it, all the pictures in this entire thing are provided by the Nurgle Mansion Discord. These are all players, hobbyists who love the army as well, so I really appreciate those people putting forward the photos to be used. So carrying on the playstyle, we have lethal hits across the army. Basically, most of our guns, 90% of them, are rocking lethal hits. So for those who don't know, lethal hits means a 6 to hit will automatically wound the target regardless of toughness. So this can give us some decent answers to some high toughness units. The only issue to some of it is that a lot of the lethal hit weapons that we do have aren't necessarily the most damaging things in the world compared to other armies and whatnot, but it is a nice bonus. It's nice to have, and it does come up quite a bit. Um, we're also a close range army. Death Guard have never really been one to. We have some units and some ability to reach out far, which is quite nice. But we typically tend to operate in the sort of like the 24-inch brawling range that I call it. Brawling kind of armies kind of want to get into the middle, have a bit of a melee, a bit of close range firepower, and sort of like tussle it out. We're not like Tower. We're not going to be shooting 40 inches across the board and then running away and hiding, etc. We really want to get stuck into that mid-board brawl. We have insane anti-infantry killing power in this army, absolutely nuts. Combined with our army trait, which we'll get onto, we have plenty of flamers with the anti-infantry keyword, which are actually really good for picking up lots of chaff infantry and even putting dents on stuff like custodians, marines. Um, the book itself generally tends to sort of lack a bit in the the index, anti-vehicle capacity, but when it comes to infantry, I actually think we're one of the better ones for killing just raw out firepower to kill infantry. We're really good at that. We tend to have a little bit of a playstyle debilitation effects at the moment. We have a lot of units like Malignant Playcaster that can sort of reduce enemy's ability to move, deal damages effectively. We have a way to reduce damage coming on us in melee, so that reduces their effectiveness, -1 to hit, etc. We've got a fair few debilitation effects. I kind of hope they would go further into this theme, but maybe when we get the codex. And we tend to also have a idea of area control. So because the army natively has this aura that we'll get onto for our army rule, we have stuff like sticky objectives. We're quite a brawly, close range firepower with all these like really nasty flamers, etc. We're sort of pretty good at dominating areas. We're not very quick at getting to the areas, but when we get there, we can sort of start to control that area a bit better than some armies that could have a harder time sort of sticking around, like your flimsier armies. But overall, that's sort of a quick summary of the Death Guard playstyle. Whether it's good at the moment, whether it's historically been good, is a different question. But for now, that is sort of like a quick, rough way to sort of summarize the Death Guard. So, first things first, let me have a quick drink. Death Guard army rule. So, no matter what detachment you play, even though there's only one at the moment, but that hopefully will come up in the future, you will always have this rule for Death Guard. So, it is a growing aura, turn by turn, for every unit in your army that reduces the toughness of any enemy within it by 1. So, this was the same one that we had last edition. It's a little less impactful this edition because the toughness range of units has massively increased. It used to be sort of T8 was the cap, and you could get some really good value out of -1 toughness, especially versus vehicles. That's no longer the case as vehicles have sort of expanded a lot higher to like T12, T13. However, when it comes to the infantry game, it's still actually massive. Dropping T4 to 3, 3 to 2, 5 down to 4, etc. It just really helps us dominate. In a lot of the cases, it's basically equivalent to having an army-wide +1 to wound versus infantry when they're near us, like bolt gunning Eldar on 2s. It makes your most rubbish weapons, like a Rhino with the 2 combi bolters on top, can actually start to threaten stuff like Eldar units. It's not just a throwaway. And then it also has a Havoc launcher, so you got like 8 shots plus D6 plus blast. All that are going to be wounding any T3 models on 2s if they're nearby. So it becomes very good there. Now, it's not to say it's useless against high toughness units. There are some important breakpoints, which we've listed on the screen there. T3, 4, 5, 8, 9, 10, 12 tend to be the most impactful ones to drop a toughness down. For example, dropping a toughness 10 vehicle to 9 will then allow your Mephitic Blight Horse to wound it on 4s naturally, and then their rule will make it wound a vehicle on a 3+. So that's basically a +2 to wound swing right there. The toughness 12 coming down, again, helpful for stuff like las cannons, 9 down to 8, like I said, again, with the multi-melters and stuff like that. Also, melee for Death Shroud Terminators, dropping down to toughness 8, means you can now be wounding them on 4s instead of 5s. So it's still a lot of applications for this rule, it's just not as straightforward, and there'll be a lot more instances where the -1 toughness doesn't matter compared to the same army rule in 9th edition. So some people say there's a slight counter synergy with lethal hits being army wide. Kind of get that. It's not really counter synergy. It's a little bit like they conflict a little bit, but it's not like they actively work against each other. It's just simply that we have ways to automatically wound you on 6s to hit, but we also then, if we don't get the 6s, we're still then making you technically easier to wound by reducing your toughness. Overall, as a rule in our army, it's okay. I would like to have seen something tacked onto it extra. Maybe ability to cycle through the old contagions, which will have like an extra effect on top of the toughness for a turn, but you can only use it once per game, so you have like you have to cycle through some. But overall, it's a decent rule. Don't forget it. It will come in really useful, especially like I said in the infantry matchup, and it also has a bit more synergy with our stratagems and etc., which we will get onto. So. Our detachment is the Plague Company detachment. So spread the sickness is our rule, and basically what it is army-wide sticky objectives. And also those sticky objectives then carry a contagion range. Again, that will interact with stratagems as we'll get onto. But that means basically if you're on an objective in your command phase and you control it, the objective is then locked in. It's called sticky, is what people call it, which means you can then leave the objective and it will still remain under your control. The objective then will also, as per our rule, become contaminated, which basically means it gets the aura we just looked at of -1 toughness projected from the objective itself. So a lot of people think this is a terrible rule and it's useless, and it's not really. It's actually quite a good rule. The only issue is it's one of those where I just wish it did something a little extra or was a bit easier to trigger the infected objectives. Um, so why is sticky objectives actually good for Death Guard and not as bad as people think? So one problem Death Guard has always had is we were too easy to we could sit on an objective and we could stand there and get shot. Um, and for armies that could do this from very far away, they never had to risk coming into range for that brawl. So they would shoot a unit off an objective. We would then not control the objective. They would still be 40 inches away. We would then next turn put another unit on it. Rinse, repeat. That unit gets picked up. They're still 40 inches away. Whereas now, if a unit manages to stick around for at least one turn, we can lock in that objective, which means the only way the opponent's going to take that off us is if they come to us. And for an army that moves 4 and 5 inches on its infantry, having to make the opponent come to you is getting your mobility issues and making it less of an issue, which is always a bonus. So it's actually quite good for that. So other things this can actually do, which is quite interesting, is it potentially can disable enemy abilities. So a lot of datasheets actually have abilities that say if you control an objective, X bonus. So a great example is Custodian Shield Guard. Custodian Shield Guard's ability is to reroll ones to wound. However, if they are on an objective they control, then they get to reroll all wounds, which is insane. So they walk onto your objective, which you've contaminated with their OC 40, I think it can get up to, something stupid. Um, and with our ability, you have to remember the timings of it. The objective can only be taken off you at the end of a turn or start of a turn. So even if they put OC 40 into you on a charge, at that point, when the fight phase comes around, they do not control that objective, which means they cannot use their rule to reroll all wound rolls. So do remember this, it's quite important to look out for because there's a lot of things that could potentially not activate or be denied by you having a sticky objective. Again, it's more about knowing your opponent's armies, but always ask them, do you, if they have a rule that says something to do with an objective, ask them, do you need to control the objective? Because if the answer is yes, then, well, they can't do it in the turn that they take it off you. It would have to be the following turn. So that's quite nice. Another good trick you can do with this is potential secondary denial. So, for example, there is a secondary objective called Overwhelming Firepower. So, Overwhelming Firepower is basically destroy enemy units that are on objectives. Now, if your opponent hasn't drawn this and you know they're going to, one trick you can do, for example, is put, if you have cultists, for example, again, cultist, poxwalkers, anything, on an objective, and they have stickied it, in your next movement phase, if you still want to like sort of stay close to the objective and safe, but you don't want to potentially give up something like overwhelming firepower, you can instead just encircle around the outskirts of the objective, so you're not touching it, you're not holding the objective, but the objective is still under your control completely. And nothing can deep strike on it as long as you position them correctly. Even with the 3-inch deep strikes that do exist, you can deny that still because there's not enough space to get the unit in. So just by doing this small little move, you're potentially denying like 3, 5 victory points, which can make a big difference, especially against stuff like indirect fire. And that's another good reason this is also a good rule. Indirect and the home unit. So the home unit is typically referred to as a unit that you bring, which is kind of crap. It's just going to sit on your home objective and stay there all game. It's just there to hold that. We don't have that issue so much because, again, we do have units like Indirect, which wouldn't mind doing that anyway. But now we're even more free to leave our home objective provided our opponent hasn't brought anything like Deep Strike or Reserves. If they deploy it on the board, it's an honest army, it doesn't have any, janky tricks. You are fairly safe then to sort of use that unit that would be holding home to go and do extra actions for you, extra objectives, score, screen, move, block, etc. Whereas they will always have to have one that sort of has to sit at home, which is obviously not something that you want to be, spending points on a unit to do. Um, Another trick with this is the cheeky cultist turn 1 infection. So for those who don't know, our cultists have a rule, Scout 6, which means before the game, but after you know who's going first turn, your cultist can make a 6-inch move for free. So if you're on certain missions and certain deployments, there is actually ways to get your cultists within objective control with the scout move. If you manage to do this and you go first, for example, you can scout move onto the point, because remember, you know if you're going first or not, and then you move on to the point where you scout move. It then goes into your actual turn, which is now the command phase. And because that was controlled in the command phase, it's now locked in with sticky. So you've got a turn 1 sticky objective there, and then your cultists are free to move and advance and go and do other things, as well as now that objective being locked in for you. It's quite good. My only issue with this rule is it's a bit slow and clunky. I think an easy way to sort of help buff this rule would be to just make the infected caveat, so that makes the contagion aura go on the objective, trigger as soon as you control the objective. That would be quite nice. But again, we're not here to talk about fixes and whatnot. We'll be doing another video for that, for potential help for Death Guard. This is just some tricks that you can do and good ways to use this rule. So, enhancements for this Plague Company. Honestly, they all kind of suck. They're not very good. Shambler is the only one that's particularly interesting, the -2 to charge for a unit. However, the problem is that melee in 10th edition is generally not as powerful as it was in prior editions. So because of this, there's not many melee armies that are sort of dominating the top par like Custodes. So it's one of those where if you have the spare points, you can get it, but none of these are really build around. So I don't think any of these are critical, and I personally play without any enhancements. Unfortunately, it's a bit sad. But they're honest, they're just not great. The droning is just it's unreliable, and well, it's not. Battleshock itself can be unreliable, but even when it goes off, it's like one mortal wound most of the time, which is just not enough to make an impact. So yeah, I'd mainly dodge enhancements unless you have like I said, if you've made a list and it's come to like 1,970 points, you can't afford anything else. Feel free to chuck one in. Until then, I would generally avoid these. So we're going to go through the stratagems, and we're going to talk about good units that go with them and good uses for the stratagems. So first one is Ferric Blight. So Ferric Blight is basically +1 AP to a unit's melee and shooting attacks. It only lasts for the phase, so you have to pick which one. So if it's in the shooting phase, it will affect the shooting weapons. Melee weapons, obviously. And any 6 to wound if you're near a infected objective, the target is within range of infected objective, sorry, then you will get an extra AP on top of the extra AP. So you can have an extra 2 AP, which is very nice, very good. So this is one of the most straightforward stratagems. It's +1 AP, and then if they're near an objective, it's an extra AP on 6 to wound. So best units to use it on. Death Shroud are actually insane with this rule, because given a weapon AP1 is actually huge, especially if the weapon has ignores cover, which Death Shroud do because they're flamers. But the main appeal of this actually, and the synergy that it can have, is the anti-keyword that we have on all our flamers. So for those who don't know, an anti-keyword is basically on a roll of X, whatever the anti is, so anti-infantry 4+, means if you're shooting infantry on a roll of a 4+, it will count as a critical wound. Now this does count as a critical wound for Ferric Blight. So, for example, you have some Death Shroud Terminators, there are Custodes, for example, near a point, a unit of 5 or something like that. They haven't took the objective, but they're within contagion range. You then shoot them with some, plague gauntlets. So up to 7d6 from a unit of 6, something like that. You then pay this stratagem, and you basically every 4 up to wound from these gauntlets, because it's anti-infantry 4+, will be at AP2, because you get the +1 AP from the strat, and then every anti-wound counts as a critical, which means they trigger the second half. So now these little strength 3 AP0 1 damage gauntlets are now all automatically wounded on 4s at AP2. It's very powerful if you manage to pull it off. Very nice. Another good unit to use is Plague Burst Crawler. Again, it has the flamers. These ones have anti-infantry 2+, so another good use for it. They also have quite a lot of guns, so if you activate it, you're getting a lot of benefit. You're getting, the 2 side weapons, your machine gun and your mortar. A good way to use it on the mortar is to look basically as if you're given a single Plague Burst Crawler ignores cover natively, because the extra AP negates the cover. And if you have a lot of virulence or something or boil blight, for example, to deny cover, then potentially AP2 indirect is actually quite scary to quite a lot of things, especially infantry. Dropping Marines to a 5 up is very nice. Dropping anything worse than that to 6 ups is very nice. So good use on that. Lord of Virulence, again, this is combos back with stuff like Death Shroud or Blight Lords. He gives the unit full rerolls to wound when shooting, so this obviously helps you fish for those sixes to wound or the anti-keyword wounds, which will then count as critical wounds, which then get you that extra AP. So you have potentially, you know, a unit of 10 Blight Lords all with bolt guns, now that's all AP1 bolt guns, so that's 40 shots at AP1, and you can then fish for sixes if you need the AP really badly. So any sixes on those wound rolls are going to be AP2. You can even pick up the successful ones and re-roll them all, and try and fish for as many sixes as possible to try and get through some heavily armored opponents. That's quite nice. Bloat drones are also really nice for this, especially the flesh mower. The flesh mower did go down to AP1. This gets us back to the old AP2 that it used to be. So having 12 attacks at AP2, 2 damage is actually quite scary. And again, you can also take the anti-infantry flamer variant, which again, as we've said, will proc the extra AP very easily. Pathetic blight haulers. So sometimes there is moments in a game where you have something on a 2-up save, and you have your blight haulers with melter gun, which are AP4, which would give them a 6-up save. Sometimes you have units that have a chance to re-roll a save for free, or fate dice, for example. So I've done it before where I will spend a command point to make sure that the Melter goes to AP5 because you cannot substitute a 6 or re-roll a save that you can't physically pass. So sometimes putting it on a unit that already has a ridiculously high AP, like AP4 to AP5, just to deny any form of saves on that. Even better if you can get ignore cover on there. It's just a way to secure a kill. Like you don't want a risk, you don't want to risk luck, you don't want to risk fate dice. You just want it to die. It's a good use of it. Honestly, any target's a good target for this. Anything with lots of attacks, lots of shoot, lots of firepower. It's one of the best strats. Ones you'll be using the most. A plus. Sanguinous Flux. So Sanguinous Flux is basically exploding sixes in melee. If you are near an infected objective marker, not contagion range, you have to be on it, which is very frustrating. It's the only some of them are within contagion range of an infected objective marker. Some of them are on it. This one requires you to be on the objective. Again, it's a bit frustrating. It would be better if it was in contagion, but if you are in infected contagion range, if you are on an objective that is infected, you get double exploding sixes. So, best units for this, Biologist Putrefier instantly. So, those who don't know, Biologist Putrefier gives a unit's weapons all lethal hits, which isn't up, meh, it's meh. Most weapons have lethal hits anyway, but the main draw is that it gives all the weapons explosions or critical hits on 5s and 6s to hit, which means lethal hits will trigger on 5s and 6s, but if you play this stratagem, so will this strat. So you'll have both auto wounding and exploding 6s on 5s and 6s to hit, which is, as you can tell, with a good amount of volume, if you have a full unit of 10-man Plague Marines, that starts to hurt quite quickly and quite nastily. So very good. Death Shroud Terminators are quite good because they have quite a good volume of attacks per model, lots of chances to proc those extra sustained hits. Again, Bloat Drone with a Flesh Mower. Basically, any weapon that sort of has a unit that has a higher volume, because obviously this is requiring you to roll 6s or 5s. The more attacks, the better. Another good use for this is any perfect weapon or target. So basically, any weapon that perfectly lines up into your target is a good use for this. So for example, Typhus in this instance has a flat 3 damage weapon. So if he's with Death Shroud, any 6 for him, if he manages to, or double 6, double explodes, that'd be insane, that goes through, flat out kills a model. So that is a lot more value than it on being on something like a Blight Lord Terminator, or a character with a damage 2 weapon, because one explode does not equal one kill, if that makes sense. Whereas we're on Typhus with a flat 3, one explode could potentially equal an extra entire kill. So that's a good way to look at whether it's worth using. It's an interesting one. I use it fairly amount of time, but the double exploding sixes is a bit hard to pull off just because of how restrictive it is. But when it does go off, it is insanely powerful. Overall, decent stratagem. Not as good as Ferric Blight though. Disgustingly Resilient. Okay, so this is the reduced damage stratagem, the tanky stratagem. Basically, you pick one of your units only in the fight phase, so it only works in melee. Um, After an enemy has targeted you, so you get to see what your enemy is swinging at first. And for 2 command points, that unit is -1 damage taken. -1 damage is good, I won't lie. However, 2 CP is brutally expensive. And for an army that used to have this innately passively, it feels pretty bad to use. And honestly, I don't use it that much unless you really have to because it's just so expensive. Um, Now, obviously, the best units to use it for are anything with massive value. So Mortarion is a great unit. He's basically the only unit I use it on. Apologies. But I'll also use it on Death Shroud. I can see the value on Terminators. It's good there to reduce, damage down to 1. If you're against a lot of like Power Fist attacks, stuff like that, helps them stick around a lot more. Um, Also very good on any unit that's Feel No Pain because I have used it where I've had 6 Blade Guard charge into 20 Poxwalkers. Most people would just let that die. I have paid the stratagem before to reduce all those damaging attacks to 1 damage because Feel No Pain versus 1 damage becomes exceptionally more powerful than versus like 2 damage, for example. So that's a good use of it. It's also very strong versus anything that has a damage 2 as their output because you're literally, before anything's even swinging, you're saying I am reducing your potential damage by 50%, just flat out halved. So that's very powerful. So they're the best uses for it. Honestly, it's a bit tough this one to use. You'll just know when you need to save it and when to use it if you're going to get counter charged. So always look a turn ahead. So if you, for example, you're going to charge him with Mortarion into a unit of something, you kill it, but you know your opponent's got another unit nearby. Maybe consider saving the 2 command points if you think you're going to need it to stay alive. Gifts of Decay. So again, this is another one that's sort of just generalist strat. Basically, you pick one of your models, it heals D3, or if you're in contagion range, so not on an objective, contagion of an infected objective, you get a flat 3 back. So obviously, best units to use this on are stuff like Mortarion, anything high value, big, tough. Um, Anything with Feel No Pain, which is Mortarion. It gets extra value because every wound you regenerate is then also another wound that could potentially then spike in a Feel No Pain and then come back into the pool. So every wound you save on Feel No Pain is technically worth more than 1 wound saved because that wound can then potentially be saved again on a Feel No Pain. So has very good value. If Mortarion's getting low, don't be afraid to use this, but also don't be afraid to use it to keep him topped up at the start of the game if people are really trying to bring him down. The value of this stratagem spikes massively as the game goes on, because trying to strip 3 wounds off Mortari in turn 1 when you've got your entire shooting on him is quite easy. Trying to strip it off him on turn 4 and 5 when you're basically playing with scraps of armies at this point is nightmarish. So healing full 3 wounds, or potentially even just D3, which I've done before, is potentially enough to mean that their army cannot kill Mortarion next turn, which means another turn of Mortarion doing his thing, potentially another turn of healing, and he can then, in turns 4 and 5, just start to basically become an unstoppable killing machine. So this one you can only really learn to use because you have to understand your opponent's output as well as your own. But it's not a bad stratagem. It's quite good. Don't overlook it. Like, this is a generally good one, especially versus Imperial Knights who get the bonus stuff if they want to kill your Warlord. Make sure you use every turn to keep Morty up because if they kill him, they're gonna get like a 5 up Feel No Pain on their entire army. Not good. Boil Blight. This one is massively underrated, I think. So it's a bit of a weird one, but basically the way it works is you have an enemy unit that has to be within contagion range of an enemy unit. So if you can do that, you then can pay a command point, pick the enemy unit within the contagion range, and your entire army then, until the end of the next turn, gets the heavy keyword and ignores cover if they shoot at that unit. So basically, the nearby unit infects them with a disease that makes them easier to spot and hit. So it's very powerful because army-wide ignore cover and heavy keyword is actually stronger than you think. Mainly because plague burst crawlers, I think are one of the best units we have so far. For them, it's basically a Lord of Virulence on a stick. Lord of Virulence again is another way of giving your army ignores cover and +1 to hit with blast weapons, which is basically sort of the same. But ignoring cover on these units is huge. I've used it many times to pick up infiltrating units, even just putting to custodies. The more value that a unit has that you use this on, so if you use it on a Death Star unit that's 450 points, like a 10-man shield guard, the more value Boil Blight has naturally. So don't go just using this on like, a unit of like 5 Skitari. Like it's not worth it, you'll pick them up anyway. But if it's like 10 Desolators and somehow you've managed to sneak in somewhat within range and managed to get Ignore's cover, which means you can now put 3 Plague Burst Crawls, ignoring cover hitting on 2s into that unit, the value is actually insane. So obviously Plague Burst Crawls, brilliant use for this, benefit brilliantly from this. Hitting on 2s, for freeze it would be if you don't have Mortarion. I just always assume I have Mortarion because then you can hit on 2s ignoring line of sight because Morty ignores the penalty and the heavy keyword if you've sat still will then give you +1 to hit, so you go from freeze to 2s and ignore the penalty and then you're also ignoring cover, so your AP is starting to matter. This can also combo back with Ferric Blight, as we've said before, because then one of your Plague's Scrolls can hit at AP2, ignoring cover out of line of sight. Stripping cover and extra AP is just always such a good combination to just make sure units get as little potential to save as possible. Another thing you can do with this is Cultist on turn 1. We talked before about the Scout move. In some games, I've done it where I will scout move aggressively, and then if I'm going first, I'll then do a move and an advance to get a turn 1 Boil Blight playoff onto a unit that wasn't expecting it. And doing this, I've picked up units of like 4 Custodian Shield Guards, Warp Spiders, Shadow Spectres. People don't expect it, and you gotta remember they can't even potentially Overwatch at this point because they could their chances are they've deployed behind buildings because as you would normally in turn 1 you're not going to stand in the open, so there's a good chance your cultists can very easily move on objective with the scout, the move, the advance, because it's potentially up to 18-inch move, string out so you're within holding range of an objective for like a secondary or something. They can also trigger Boil Blight if you get within range of an enemy unit, because you've got an extra 3-inch contagion range on the end, so you have potentially a 21-inch threat range. And they can still, because it's not counting as them shooting or doing anything, they can also do potentially an action if you didn't advance. Bear in mind, if you advance, you can't do an action. Unfortunately, no assault weapons for us. But it can really take some people by surprise. Anyone that deploys sort of on the 2-quarter deployments where there's like a 9-inch no man's land between you in the corners. It's quite easy to get in range of a unit, and suddenly your 55-point cultist unit has done what it was going to do anyway, which is go out turn 1, score a secondary, and die. But it's also brought additional value and it helped your Plague Burst Crawls pick up a unit. So it's very nice. It's also great for rhinos who have done something like dropped off Plague Marines, done their job already. Now it's just an empty rhino with 2 combi bolters. Now you've got a unit that's relatively tough, but can also then go driving around applying Boil Blight to units without having to expose one of your more powerful units that you don't want to give up for free. Also, the Hellbrute. So as per the last FAQ, the Hellbrute now counts to any unit that it hits specifically within contagion range of himself, which means you can use this to trigger Boil Blight from potentially up to, I think it's 48 inches with a las cannon. Now, I wouldn't recommend the las cannon because it's only one shot. I would recommend probably something like Plasma Cannon plus the Fist, because the Fist is a combi bolter and you only need a single hit. So you have D3 shots with Blast, so you could potentially just roll the 1, but that's why the combi bolter then can also come in with the up to 2 or 4 shots, and a single hit would allow you to trigger Boil Blight on any unit. Now, Hellbrutes are a bit expensive at the moment. Again, we're not going to go too hard into specific units at the moment, but if they go down in points, I could start seeing myself bringing these just to trigger Boil Blight because I love this ability. It's such a cool stratagem when you manage to pull it off. So yeah, it's a good, solid stratagem. Happy with that one. Cloud of Flies. It's basically -1 to be hit from ranged attacks. It's pretty good. It's good if you have any units in your army that have the smoke keyword anyway, because it gives you the ability to have potentially 2 smokes in a turn. If you have a Plague Burst Crawler, or sorry, Mortarion or something, and a Predator, they go to shoot the Predator, you can smoke with the Predator, and then if they also want to shoot Mortarion, you can Cloud of Flies on Mortarion. So you've got 2 units there with -1 to be hit, one of them also gaining cover, but Morty's easy to get cover, just literally hide anything and be like the tip of his scythe behind a building, and he gets cover. Basically, Best way to think about using this is anything that's vital to live. So don't be too precious about just using it on big units like Morty. Sometimes using it on Poxwalkers if it means they're going to survive. Like for example, you've strat reserved them in your opponent's deployment zone. They've showed up. They've scored a secondary. They're going to be a pain in the ass to remove. Make them even more of a pain in the ass to remove. Give them that -1 to be hit. Make them be annoying because then potentially they can move forward, take the opponent's home objective, and then it can just snowball and snowball and snowball. And if they want to deal with it, they might have to dedicate something more powerful to it. And this is where we talk about what's called activation burning. So, for example, if you come across a knight, for example, a big, huge knight, and he can kill your unit mathematically, and this is where he sort of comes into knowing maths, knowing like odds and chances. Um, if you know mathematically, he can fairly comfortably kill X unit. However, if you pop smoke, those odds become a lot more cloudy. You can really mess with your opponent by doing something like that. Now, if they're 100% going to kill it regardless, don't be wasting the command point. Don't be daft. But if it comes to a point where I have two big knights, that's all they've got left, for example. One of them can shoot X unit and pick it up mathematically. You pop Cloud of Flies and that suddenly becomes can maybe pick it up. Then there's a good chance they will have to also commit the other knight into helping out, which then burns an activation. As armies can only activate as many units as they have, that could potentially save another unit from getting swept away as well. So you've potentially made them have to commit twice the amount of firepower to one unit, which then saves another unit, even though the original unit that you used the stratagem on did still die. Okay, but again, don't be wasteful on this. Use it when it's key objectives, secondaries. Units like Morty has to live this turn, or these, like I said, these Poxwalks in the backline need to be as annoying as possible. But don't just throw it out for free. So that's all the stratagems. So Death Guard in general in 10th edition, we're going to go over some don'ts. Unfortunately, the first don't is the classic Death Guard playstyle. So unfortunately, in the current state of 10th, the classic Death Guard playstyle of lots of Terminators, lots of Plague Marines, does not work, and it breaks my heart to say that, but it just doesn't work. And I think this is a lot of the issues of people with Death Guard at the moment is they're still trying this play style. Rightfully so. That's probably what you want, it's probably what you expect from the army, but it doesn't work. I've tried it. Trust me, it doesn't work. And it's where a lot of the feels bads are coming from. Um, it's just not it. Don't try to tank your opponent. So don't try and stand there like you used to be able to, and basically try and damage check your opponent, because at the moment the only thing that kind of sets us apart is the extra toughness, and it just doesn't matter at the moment. It really just doesn't. I have had units get leaf blowed up instantly from just things that before would not really even scratch you. So the idea when people tell you to sort of just stand on objectives, just hold them, and challenge your opponent to kill you off, don't do that. It doesn't work anymore. They will kill you off 100%. And you've just thrown away units. We have to play this a lot more smart now. We can't just stand there and rely on our -1 damage and our toughness to carry us through the day. Even though I think like we do need some of that ability back, at the moment it does not work. And if you do that, you're gonna have a bad time. Don't rely on melee. Melee at the moment in general in 10th is really just not it. It's a lot less powerful than it used to be. Our melee as well, our profiles got gutted a lot more as well. Our Plague Marines especially are feeling the worst part of it. You can't, for example, run 10 Plague Marines into a knight and wipe it out anymore. It was funny when we could 190 points, picking up 450. Probably shouldn't have been doing that, but we got used to it. But it doesn't work anymore. You can still do a lot of damage, but nowhere near the amount you need to, and then again you don't have the resilience to take the clap back, so you charge out, maybe take 10 wounds off a knight, the knight then just shoots you and picks you up, and nothing was achieved. Like, you did 10 wounds, that's decent, but you've lost the entire unit plus some characters and stuff. um, I don't recommend fixed objectives. Now, there's very niche scenarios. Me and Don Houston have been talking. There's very niche scenarios and niche matchups where maybe you could, but I wouldn't take in general fixed objectives. I'd always play tactical, even versus stuff like knights. Say a lot of Death Guard or a lot of players in general take bring it down versus knights because you think, oh, it's easy, every kill is points. The problem is Death Guard just aren't very good at killing stuff like, especially stuff like vehicles. And I don't think it's even a guarantee that you will kill the knights quick enough to score it to be worth locking you into fixed objectives compared to tactical. Um, Unfortunately, the next one hurts. Virions. Virions right now, because of the state of Plague Marines and the cost of Virions, are not worth it. They just are not worth it. A Plague Marine squad is okay, but the problem is Virions are the same rough points they were last edition, but can only buff one unit, and after that they're basically useless. Um, if the unit dies, they can't join another one. We've gone from a state of the game where we had like one biologist Putrefier could buff multiple units nearby. You give him the Arch Contaminator, the Figaris Helm. Now he's got a 9-inch aura of reroll all wounds with plague weapons, etc. Super good. To now him just being locked to his one squad he can join. And as we already stated, Plague Marines aren't in the greatest state at the moment. They don't really hit very hard, and adding extra points to make these units potentially hit okay just isn't worth it. You're looking at like a Rhino with 10 Plague Marines and 2 Virions in it. You're looking pushing it like near to 400 points for one unit of guys with 2 character support, which dies super easy because again we don't have -1 damage innately. It's just not worth it. So unfortunately for now, I would avoid Virions in general. Unfortunately, I don't run any. The people that I know play DevCard competitively and are trying the best have also decided to drop this unit. Unfortunately, I don't like it. I'm not happy about it, but it's the way it is. Don't try and brute force. We really have to think at the moment. This isn't an army that can just walk down the table like Eldar at the moment and just blow everything away. We've really got to study our mission, our terrain. So if you're going to a tournament, look at the mission pack, look at the terrain pack, build your list to that. Think about how you're going to score objectives. We can't just take our list and that is the list. Everything has to be built around at the moment because of the state that Death Guard are in with the low win percentage and being on the more underpowered side. And when you play with Mortarion, which I think should be in every list, don't throw him at them. Morty's not a powerhouse beat stick and he's not invulnerable. He's quite tough, but he's very killable still. And a lot of people think that you just throw Morty at the opponent. No, he's there to sort of sit back, support with his aura, be a counter charge, and then once the threats to Morty are dealt with or at least hampered massively, then Mortarion can start to move out and make his plays and start to earn his own points back. Do's. So play the mission. Bring units for this. So I bring cultists, nurglings, spawn, minimum units of Death Shroud, anything that is going to help me gain board presence and help me score secondaries. You win the game off victory points, not kills. Kills help, and kills out do get you some victory points, but we really have to play for the mission, and a lot of the armies at the moment that are struggling are having to play in a mission focused mindset. It's very important. So look at stuff like Nurgling allies. Look at using cultists coming from reserves, which is our next point on here. Anything that can do these cheap throwaway units, don't commit too hard to, I've just got 10 mans in Rhinos, I'm going to try and just smash my opponent. We can't do it at the moment in the current state of Death Guard, so we really have to focus on our mission play. Make sure you're using reserves and deep strike. Rapid ingress is one of the most powerful stratagems in the game at the moment. We'll go into how to use that into a different video more effectively with the general strats. But reserves are massively underused. Even doing stuff like putting the predators in reserves so they can come in and get good angles. Don't be afraid to do that. Poxwalkers in reserves. Again, Poxwalkers, 20 Poxwalkers are not really great walking up the board. They'll probably just die. But you give it 3 turns of Plague Burst Mortar in any anti-infantry off, and then bring them in your opponent's back line because you've killed all the screens, killed the anti-infantry stuff. Suddenly it's a big problem for them to deal with, and they're not going to be happy about it. Even worse if Typhus is with them. So make use of reserves, make use of deep strike, clever use of rapid ingress. Is the best way to sort of get that board presence and play the missions even more. Don't play fair. By that I don't mean don't cheat. So no, don't not don't cheat. Just don't cheat. Okay, but don't play fair. By that I mean abuse stuff. Abuse our unique abilities like Mortarion, helping our army ignore modifiers. Custodes, -1 damage, -1 to hit and melee. Nah, sod it off. Eldar, -1 to hit from all this stuff at range, -1 to wound on, what do you call it? Warwalkers? Nah, sod all that. Take Mortarion, ignore it all. Say your rule doesn't matter. My rule says I ignore your rule. It really helps us. It's one of the unique things that we have, and sort of gives the list that I run its identity of being the no, you don't get to do that list. Plague Burst Crawls, again, another unit doesn't really play fair. Ignoring line of sight is a bit toxic. People don't like it, but At the moment, we can't win these fair fights. We can't stand on the table, brawl with someone, and come out on top at the moment. So we have to play these dirty tricks, mortaring off key units, killing the unit that's holding their home objective. So now they have to commit an actual unit to hold the home objective. So that unit's basically neutered. Um, all these little things you can do. Anti-infantry keyword, spam the shit out of it. It's funny. Custodies with their toughness 7 infantry, and you just laugh at them because you're all wounded on 2s. Hilarious, funny, and they'll get really mad. um, think about target priority. What are you shooting with Plague Burst Crawls? What are you shooting with your Predators? What's the actual threats? If you remove an opponent, if you look at your opponent's list, identify key points. How much anti-tank do they have? How much anti-horde do they have? Is there any weak point in that army? If they're lacking anti-tank, can I take out the bit of anti-tank that they have? If the answer is yes, then do that and then use that ability to then be aggressive with Plague Burst Crawlers, be aggressive with Mortarion. Do they, again, going back to the Potswalker thing, do they lack anti-infantry? Yes, they've got like one unit of like, I don't know, 6 Flamestorm aggressors. Mortar the shit out of them, they're dead, then bring in the Poxwalkers from behind them. Nightmare for them to deal with. Got to think about all these little things. You can't just brute force. Everything has to be thought out. Everything you do has to be precise, have purpose, and have a reason for why you're targeting that unit. Um, yeah. The next point, anti-infantry. Again, it's really powerful. Make good use of it. It's really good. Stratagem, creativity, and uses. Again, we're talking about turn on Bilebite plays with scouts like that. Other ways you can sort of use the Ferric Blight the most efficiently. Looking ahead of time, seeing if I bring my Lord of Virulence in here, the next turn that means he can see there, ignore cover. I can then Ferric Blight, drop the Desolator squad to a 5-up save against this. Against d6 plus 3 shots with blast keyword is nice, extra damage. Just really think about your use of stratagems, especially when it comes to like rapid ingress. It's super 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 powerful, super important. um Set up plays for yourself. This will only get learned by you just playing the game more and more. Overwatch, for example, making sure you have a Plague Burst Crawler that can overlook an angle, so if someone comes to try and take an objective, he can fire his flamers into them, potentially stop them taking that. There's lots of things you've got to be aware of. Another thing is control space. Again, this is what we just said then about Plague Burst Crawlers, stuff like that. Taking up space, using Nurgling allies to infiltrate to deny their infiltrators, deny, screen out, think about reserves, use all your anti-infantry auto-hitting weapons to control objectives. So, put them in a lose-lose situation where if you don't take this objective, I start running away in primary. If you try and send chaff to me, I will just kill it with Overwatch from a Plague Burst Crawler. If you send an actual threatening unit, I've got a counter-charge unit ready and set up to deal with that unit. You've really got to think about controlling the battlefield at the moment and trying your best to sort of dictate the fight, lose as little resources as possible, and force them to commit more than they want to. So another little bit on do's, keep practicing, guys. Practice does really help. It's massive. Your skill matters more than you think in a lot of games. Until you're pushing like top tables, like table, around 4 or 5, you're undefeated. That's when your army kind of starts to let you down a little bit sometimes. But everything else, I promise you, you can practice, you can get better, you really can do it. But you've just got to keep pushing, keep trying your best. It will get better as well. We're gonna get buffs, so stay positive. Don't let the negativity drag you down. I understand like no one's particularly happy right now with Death Guard. Even I'm not, I won't lie. But there you can have a moan, you can have a whinge. I moan and whinge, don't get me wrong. I don't like certain things about the army. I wish it was certain ways. But at the end of the day, if I just keep whinging, just keep being negative, nothing's gonna happen. I've had my whinge, I've had my moan. Now I've been given what I've been given. How do we make this work? And this is really important to try and push yourself. And it goes to the next point: engage with like-minded people. Don't sit there and be one of those people that just sits on Facebook and forums and stuff and just moans all the time about how bad Death Guard is. We know, like we're aware, we know it sucks. But if you can sit there and go, okay, Death Guard sucks at the moment, but let's try and do the best we can. Let's try and push for the 2 wins, the 3 wins. If you manage to go 2 wins as Death Guard at a 5-round event, you are above the Death Guard average. So you're doing really well. You push 3 wins, you're doing insanely well. You start going any higher than that, I'll shake your hand. Well done. Like, nice work, dude. Like, impressive. So just engage with people that really want to be positive, because the negativity just makes everything get worse. Nurgle's Mansion Discord, they're the people that provided all the photos on here. The fellas in there are of that mindset of, look, we know we've been dealt the shorthand, but let's just make it work. Let's see what we can do our best. We cheer each other on when we do well. We cheer each other on when we do bad. And it's just a great place to sort of interact with like-minded players that really want to take an underpowered underdog faction and do the best that they possibly can. Um, but for now, that's all for the sort of like overall quick roundup of sort of like a summary of Death Guard competitive in 10th edition. This is a series, so don't worry, that's not the end of it. This is just a quick look at our army rules, our stratagems, some points on that, and a few do's and don'ts. So we're going to be looking into stuff like leaders, troops, units, the best like heavy supports to bring along, some example lists, some example gameplay, some example matchups. This is the first of the series. It's a bit rough, it's a bit ad hoc, I know. My editing skills aren't great. I know it looks like a 10-year-old's child's presentation, and I'm just kind of speaking, no script, no nothing. I just kind of go off what I'm saying, what I'm thinking. But I hope that you can join me on this journey. We can learn together. We can help potentially teach some tricks that you can use, and we will, overall, maybe we can get that Death Guard win rate just a little bit higher together. So thank you very much for tuning in, everyone, and have a great time. And we'll see you on the next one. Take care, guys. See you later.